Welcome back everyone to this new video. Today I will cover the semifinals of the Team Chess Battle event. This is a new event where players, mainly Grandmasters and International Masters, are playing against each other in two players teams. The players are allowed to talk to each other during the game. This is a very interesting concept because we get to see the thought process of the players. Today's players are gonna be Levi Rosman, also known as Gotham Chess, and Hikaru Nakamura against Daniel Naroditsky and Robert Hess. But before we get into the video, please like and subscribe. It helps me a lot. And also, I left the link to my Twitch channel in the comments. Having said that, let's get into the video. So, in the first game, Nakamura and Rosman are playing with black pieces, and Naroditsky and Hess are playing with white pieces. The game starts with e4 c6. This is known as the Caro-Kann defense, and the idea is that black wants to challenge white's control in the center with the move d5, supported by the c6 pawn. And after d4, d5, we see that the players go for the main line of the Tartakower. This is known as the Tartakower. White exchanges the knight on f6 to damage black's pawn structure, and black is gonna have open lines with bishop, but he's gonna have a slightly damaged pawn structure. We got the move bishop to c3, bishop to d6. Bishop to d6 is not the most popular move. The most popular move is to move bishop to f5, and white can exploit the fact that black didn't play bishop to f5 by playing bishop to d3, so black now cannot play this move. We got castle, queen to c2 on an I on h7. We got rook to e8 check. White blocks with the knight, of course, and after h5, white decides to castle. Now h5 is a really aggressive move because you are getting out of the danger of the bishop and the queen, and you're threatening to attack on this side of the board. Now, we got h4, knight to f4, and knight to d7. Now, white tries to reroute the queen this way to create some sort of pressure over here with the queen. We got knight to f8 and queen to h5. Now, black decides to take this knight, and even though white can gain the bishop pair, the idea is to play knight to g6 to attack the bishop. Now black has a choice. The best choice is to retreat the bishop to d2 to claim a very small advantage, which consists of the bishop pair. Usually the players with two bishops has a slight advantage against the player with one bishop. However, this is just a free pawn, and white decides to take it with bishop g6 and queen g6. However, the idea is that white will try to go to an endgame where the players are gonna have opposite colored bishop, which means that the players will likely make a draw because opposite colored bishop are very drawish in endgames. All right, we got bishop to e6, developing the bishop. The move h3, just controlling the squares and making sure the bishop and the king have a retreating square. Now we got the move queen to d5, rook to e1, and black decides to go for a queen trade because black thinks that in an endgame, even though you have an opposite colored bishop, you have two rooks, and with those rook you're gonna claim a small advantage because you're a pawn up. So we got takes, we got the move a4. Now, I don't know why black didn't play a5. In this position, I will absolutely play a5 to shut down any play in the queen side. Instead, we got king to f7, centralizing the king. This is a very important thing to do in all endgames. In general, you should try to bring your king towards the middle. We got the move takes, and bishop to e3, closing the rook. So now the rook cannot come to e2 on the second rank. We got the move a6, maybe preparing for b5. And here white stops all of that with the move a5. So now if you play b5, there is en passant, so you cannot play b5. Here we got bishop to d3, controlling all these light squares, and rook a4 has this intent is to attack the pawn on b7. And after g5, you see rook to b4, rook to e7, protecting the pawn on b7, and rook to a6. Now, it might seem like this rook is very active on this square, but in reality, this rook isn't doing much, and the game will probably end in a draw because there is not there is no way in which white can break through, really, because the light squares are protected by the bishop, and the other bishop cannot fight for the light squares because it's a dark squared bishop. So we got bishop to c4, and we just see that there is no way in which white can advance. We see that white puts its pawns to light squares because he will try to break through with the pawn break. We see king to f2, centralizing the king, and f4. And after takes, king g6, bishop d2. This position is not very interesting. The game will probably end in a draw. Although with black, you really have to be careful because you're still pawn down. But after b5, we see that this isn't really a dangerous break for black because here you couldn't take the bishop because you will take this and promote. So we got b takes a6 and bishop e1. Bishop e1 is a really cool move because it poses some problem to the black position, but still, if black goes for the rook trade, there is not much in this position. Now, black needs to be careful to stop this pawn and to not let him advance. So we got king to f1, and after this exchange, this position is just a draw. And the players kept playing for a while. There is not much in this position. It's not really interesting. Both players have passed pawns. Now the bishop will likely control all these light squares, so the pawn cannot advance. And the players, after a while, equalize the game in the sense of material. In fact, we see that here black takes this pawn and white takes this pawn, and even though white has a pawn, this pawn is not getting through, and this position is just a draw. The players went on to play 50 more moves until the 50 move rule, which is a rule that says that if a pawn is not moved or any piece isn't captured, the game ends in a draw. And the first game ends actually in a draw. Now, if you think game number 1 was uneventful or boring, wait until you see this next game, because this next game was absolutely crazy. Nakamura and Rosman are playing with white pieces, and Naroditsky and Hess are playing with black pieces. And got the English opening. Nakamura and Rosman used this against Hansen and Van Forest in the quarterfinals, and they won. And this just shows that the English is a very powerful opening, especially in Blitz and Rabbit. And the idea is most often to play g3 and play this to the diagonal. However, black decides to go for the King's Indian. We see this move g6, bishop to g7, and now white decides to take the whole center. We see this move e4, and next move d4. So this is a transposition to a King's Indian when white takes all the center with pawns. We see bishop to g7, h3. h3 here is very popular because you want to play bishop to e3, but if you play bishop to e3 straight away, knight to g4 becomes a problem. Here we see this move h3, and after castles, now white plays bishop to e3, and we see this move c6, just controlling the squares in the center. We see knight to f3, knight a6, 96 is a move you have to play because you cannot put the knight on c6, and the knight on d7 just doesn't do much. On a6, you are controlling any b4 break, and we see bishop to d3. Now, in this position, a bishop to e2 is more popular than bishop to e3 because you control this diagonal, but bishop to d3 is a fine move, of course. We see e5, and here white decides to close the center. Now, generally, in position where the center is closed, players can attack on the wings, which means white will focus on an attack on the queen side, and black will focus on an attack on the king side. Because when the center is closed, there is not any possibility for counterplay in the center. Here we see knight to h5, preparing the move f5 maybe in the future. We see castle, then knight to f4, putting the knight on these active squares. And here a3 to prepare b4. And here takes black maybe could have played bishop t7 instead of taking, because this knight is really strong. It is controlling a lot of squares in the center. Here we see knight takes d3, queen takes d3, and c5. Now there isn't any tension in the center, which means the position is completely locked. In position where it is very difficult to make moves, you gotta watch for pawn breaks. In this position, the pawn break f5 is very thematic for black, and b4 is gonna be a very thematic move for white. Now we see knight to d2, trying to reroute and preparing against f5. Here we see f3, strengthening the center, and here black closes the position once again, because black will try to advance these pawns and to create an attack. Here we see the move g5 and rook to b1. Rook to b1 has a very clear intent. The intent is to bring the king to e2, because white thinks that the king is safer over here than it is over here, because the attack by black looks very promising. Here we see this move h5, and after king to f1, the move rook to f6 was played. This is called a rook lift, and the idea is that you want to bring your rook into the game by moving it up. Here we see king to e2 and rook to h6. Now, white thinks that this attack by black is actually an overextension of its kingside pawns, and maybe white can create a counter attack. Now we see this move rook to h1, winning the rook back, and rook to g1. Now white transfers all the rooks over here, because as I said, he will try to look for a counter attack on this side of the board, because the black king is here and the white king is here. So actually black is the one who will suffer an attack. Now we see queen to f6, bringing an attacking piece, but here this great move g4. Here there is a forced move, which is en passant. If you don't know in chess, if there is en passant on the board, you gotta play. It's an official rule. No, it's actually not an official rule. And in this case, it's actually a slight inaccuracy. It was far better to keep the tension and not to take, because after you take, white really has a lot of pressure. Now we see this move rook to g6 and knight to e1, rerouting on this side of the board over here. And we see knight to c7, bringing this knight back to help the other pieces defend the black king. And we see rook to g1, which is a slight inaccuracy, but it's a pretty straightforward move. The idea is to double up on the g file. The computer gives it an inaccuracy, but it's not really an inaccuracy. We see this move b5, breaking over here to look for counterplay, and we see h4. h4 is actually a great move, because now the rook will have to go back, but the rook doesn't actually have to go back. In fact, here white sacrificed the rook. Here there was a pretty funny moment, because Rosman is known for the rook meme, where a player sacrifices the rook and he screams, The rook, I'm sure you saw that, and here white really sacrifices the rook, and the idea is that after takes, the idea is that this bishop was a key defender of the black position. After you take, you have strong possibilities of creating attacking chances. We see rook to b8 and knight to f5 and rook to b1. Here the idea is that you want to gain control over the b file, and we see bishop to e3 targeting the weaknesses in the black position, knight to e8 and rook to b5. After knight to c7, rook goes back. Now the players are trying to find a breakthrough in the position. Queen to c3 and queen to a5, pinning the rook to the queen. This rook cannot move, otherwise you lose the queen. And here queen to c7 was played to have protection. Now white is down an exchange, but this knight is not really doing much, so the exchange is not really felt. We see, I'm sorry, I spoiled the game. That was a mistake. I'm sorry. So in this position, white decides to exchange the rooks, but this was not the most accurate decision because you're down in exchange, so you should try to keep as many pieces on the board to create any chances of an attack. After rook b6, knight takes b6, this knight comes back into play, and we see this move: queen to a6, into g6, knight to b3, and rook h1. Here, the h pawn is really strong because it's a passed pawn, which is supported by the rook, and there is not really a way in which white can stop the h pawn. It's really difficult. So white decides to play king to g1 to try to stop the a pawn. Here we see this move, rook to h7, which was not the most accurate move because it gives white the chances to play knight to a5, which is a really important move because you're trying to get this knight to c6, where it's gonna live there forever. This is known as an outpost square, which is a square where a knight cannot be kicked out by a piece which is worth less than a knight. We see queen to c8, and here queen to b5 is actually it's actually difficult for black to defend because rook to c7, the h pawn is tapped, and here white has a lot of mobility with its pieces. The h pawn is tapped, as I said. We see queen to d7 looking for a queen trade, but white of course decides not to queen trade, and we see I'm sorry, we see king to king to f6. King to f6 is not the most accurate move because the king is just a target on this square. And after the move a4, rook to b7, the queen is under some pressure, so the queen steps away. Queen to c7. Now the players are making mistakes because they have low time. We see bishop to d2 and bishop to a5. The idea is that you want to target the queen and to create an infiltration for your pieces. We see knight to b8, forcing a trade of queens, and even though you win a pawn, this h pawn is really strong. So white won a pawn, but black is still an exchange up. So right now the count of material is that black is up a rook for a knight and a pawn. So here we see this move, knight to e8 check, king to f7, and back. Now the players were actually repeating moves. And here black had 2 seconds on the clock, and Naroditsky was like, yeah, just make the draw and go to an Armageddon. But as at the end of it, there were 2 seconds on the clock. He said, no, let's keep playing because I believe we have some chances. And in fact, they decide not to take the repetition. Instead, we see knight to e5 and knight to a5. Now, this move, knight to d4, trying to exchange the knight, you cannot really take this knight, otherwise the pawns will just storm the white position. We see this move, d6, trying to create chances for white. But in this position, after rook b1, rook b2, the players gain some time, and knight e6, the pawn is stopped. You cannot break through with this pawn. You're gonna play, and next you're gonna play h3, h2, h1, and there is not really a way where white can stop it. So we see rook to b2, just shuffling back and forth to gain some times. I remind you that the players gain 10 seconds as they make a move. So we see rook to b2, king to g1, and rook d2. Now the pawn is stopped, and the h pawn will be an asset for black. We see a5, a6. The a5 is stopped as well. King to h1. After a bit of the repetition, we got knight to f4, preparing to push the f pawn, the h pawn. I'm sorry. And here the king threatens this. You cannot push because you will get taken. We see this move, knight to d5 check, cutting the rook out, and after an exchange, this pawn is stopped by the king, and this pawn will just march down the board. We see rook to e2, threading the knight, and knight to d3 back. The players here were repeating moves, but black decides to go for h3. Here we see h3, h2. Now this pawn on h2 is really strong, and the king is blocked. You cannot move it, and we see how black converts this winning position. We see this move f4, and after takes g5, there is not much white can do to stop the pawns. We see f3, g4, g6. I'm sorry, it's a race, but this pawn is stopped, and this pawn are not stopped. Here we see knight to e5. This is the last blunder because the move f2 is winning. Here the players had less than 10 seconds, and it was a really tense moment. Naroditsky was screaming the move f2, just play f2, and after they played it, white took the pawn, but after after h1 queen, f1 queen, king to h2, queen to f4, there is the fork, and the game is over. And here white resigned. So the game ended in a win for Naroditsky and I, who will be playing in the finals. Now, this game was probably my favorite game of the event, and it was full of emotions. At the end, Naroditsky was quite obnoxious in his celebration, which was really cool to see because it just shows you how much passion these players have for the game, and it's really cool to see to hear their thoughts. And yeah, I really like these kind of events. I was watching this live, I remember, and the celebration after the win was just incredible. As always, I hope you liked the video, and see you in the next one.